What happens when Elon Musk's 5-year-old son says something about God on live TV, and the whole world stops to listen? One innocent sentence sparks global headlines, fierce debate, and a moment that even Elon never saw coming. But what did the boy really say? And why did it strike so deep? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The studio was alive with color and energy. Cheerful music played, the walls were painted in soft pastels, and a sunlit window backdrop gave the set a warm, welcoming glow. Coffee mugs sat neatly on a glass table between two overstuffed couches. Beside the couches, a potted plant added a touch of nature, and a set of cue cards rested in the hands of the hosts. The morning show was in full swing. Host Jenny Parker and Tom Williams stood center stage, welcoming viewers to another segment of their weekday program. They were all smiles, ready for a relaxed conversation with one of the most recognizable names in the world. Elon Musk sat down on the couch beside them, wearing a navy blazer over a t-shirt, trying his best to appear relaxed. But there was a stiffness in his posture, a tightness around his eyes. He was no stranger to cameras, but this setting, lighthearted, family-oriented, emotional, wasn't his usual domain. Beside him, 5-year-old X swung his legs and looked around with wide eyes, clearly curious but completely at ease. Before the cameras rolled, Elon leaned down and whispered, "You don't have to say anything, okay? Just sit with me." X nodded calmly and gave a small smile. Nobody expected what would happen next. Jenny, one of the morning show hosts, leaned slightly toward X with a smile and said casually, "It must be so exciting having a dad who does such amazing things." No one expected X to answer. His microphone wasn't supposed to be live. But somehow it was, and his voice came through loud and clear. "Dad says God gave everyone special gifts," X said without hesitation, his small voice filling the studio. "And his is seeing what others can't." The hosts froze. Elon did too. For a moment, no one moved. The control room went silent. Elon turned to his son, eyes wide, unsure if he'd just heard what he thought he heard. But X wasn't finished. "Dad says some people think science and God are enemies," he added, still calm and thoughtful. "But who made the rules science follows?" A stunned hush fell over the room. Even Jenny and Tom looked at each other, mouths slightly open. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second. By the time the segment ended, producers knew they had a viral moment on their hands. Before the show even aired nationwide, clips of X's remarks were already being cut, captioned, and uploaded to social media. The internet was about to explode, and Elon Musk had no idea what was coming next. Elon Musk had never planned to speak about religion, certainly not in front of a live national audience. He wasn't someone who made declarations of faith or shared inner beliefs publicly. To him, those thoughts were private, deeply personal, and far too complex to fit into media soundbites. Especially with a figure like him, every word was dissected, interpreted. But now, thanks to his 5-year-old son, that quiet door had been blown wide open, and there was no closing it again. Later that evening, back at home, Elon sat in his study, staring out the window. The world was already ablaze with reactions, headlines, and debates. But his mind wasn't on any of that. It was on his son, and on the memory of where this all began. Growing up in South Africa, Elon had gone to church with his family. He remembered the dusty pews, the echo of the pastor's voice, and the quiet awe he sometimes felt looking up at stained glass windows. But as he got older, his path led him toward logic, physics, and provable theories. The spiritual questions didn't disappear. They just got buried under equations and ambitions. And yet, with X, those questions had resurfaced in simple, childlike ways. When they looked at the stars together, X would ask, who made them? When they talked about machines and rockets, X wondered where imagination came from. Elon had answered as best he could, not realizing how deeply his son had listened. It hit him now. Those late-night stargazing talks weren't just bonding moments. They were formative. X had been absorbing more than Elon ever knew, not just about science, but about wonder, about faith. And now, because of one unscripted moment on live television, the whole world was seeing a side of Elon Musk he had never intended to share. By the time Elon Musk returned home from the studio, the internet was already ablaze. Social media clips of his son's spontaneous remarks were racking up millions of views, while news outlets scrambled to dissect every word. Religious leaders were calling it a divine moment. Atheist commentators dismissed it as childhood mimicry. Every corner of the cultural spectrum had something to say, and none of it had been planned. His PR team was in full damage control mode. "We're being flooded," Sarah, his chief publicist, reported as she paced the floor of his office. "CNN wants a comment, so does The Guardian, and we've got requests from faith-based outlets, science podcasts, and even a few parenting magazines." Elon sat back, rubbing his temples. "I'm not turning my son into a media soundbite," he said firmly. "He's 5 years old. He didn't sign up for this." "I know," Sarah replied gently, "but the world thinks he just revealed your private worldview, and now everyone wants to know, what do you really believe?" That night, after the media frenzy had begun to feel like a storm pressing against the walls of their home, Elon found X curled up in the corner of the living room, quietly playing with Legos. "Hey, buddy," Elon said, sitting down beside him. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" X looked up. "Am I in trouble?" Elon shook his head. "No, not at all. You just surprised me today. What you said on the show, it was big. Grown-ups weren't expecting it." "I just told them what you said," X replied simply, "about God and science and the gifts." "I know," Elon said, his voice soft. "And you didn't do anything wrong. You were honest. I'm proud of you for that." X paused, thinking, "Did I make things hard for you?" Elon took a deep breath. "A little," he admitted. "But not because you were wrong. Sometimes grown-ups don't know how to handle big questions, especially in public. But it's not your job to fix that. It's my job." Later, after putting X to bed, Elon returned to his office and stood at the window, staring out at the stars above Los Angeles. He had spent most of his life answering questions about technology, business, and the future of civilization. But now, the world was asking him about God. Not because he had volunteered, but because his son had cracked open a door. He didn't want to issue a denial. That would feel dishonest. But he didn't want to feed the speculation either. Not about faith, not about belief, and certainly not about X. The question circled in his mind like a satellite caught in orbit. What's the right thing to do? Then, an idea. He wouldn't speak as a theologian, he wouldn't give a sermon, but he could say something as a father, as a man who'd spent years having thoughtful conversations with his child about the mysteries of the universe. He pulled out a notepad and started writing. "My son and I often talk about the stars," he began. "And sometimes, those talks lead to bigger questions about purpose, creation, and the limits of what we can understand." He kept the tone thoughtful, simple, and respectful. Not a declaration of belief, not a denial, just an invitation for curiosity, for wonder, and for the kind of childlike honesty that X had shown on live TV. The world didn't need perfect answers, Elon realized. Maybe what it needed most was permission to keep asking the questions. Elon sat alone in his study, the glow from 3 monitors casting long shadows across the room. Each screen played a different broadcast. One a morning news segment dissecting X's comments, another a panel of theologians speculating on Elon's private beliefs, and the third, a popular science channel trying to explain the God and science debate sparked by a 5-year-old. Elon rubbed his forehead and leaned back, feeling a heaviness he couldn't shake. The sound of his phone buzzing broke the silence. It was his mother. "Hi, Mom," he answered, trying to sound composed. "I saw the interview," she said gently. "Your father and we were surprised. not at what X said, but at how the world reacted. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Elon replied. "It was just a moment between me and him." His mother chuckled softly. "Darling, you've always asked the big questions, even when you were a boy. Do you remember the little church we went to in Pretoria?" Elon hesitated. "Yeah, I remember. You used to ask the pastor why God allowed black holes," she said with a fond laugh. "You didn't just accept things. You needed to understand." Elon smiled faintly at the memory. "I guess I've always needed evidence. But sometimes," she said, "what people need isn't proof. It's presence. Someone willing to wonder with them. Maybe that's what X offered." After the call ended, Elon remained seated, staring at the muted screens. Clips of X's quotes played on loop, now captioned in bold type. Commentators on both sides were quick to use the child's words to support their own agendas. Conservative voices claimed Elon was having a spiritual awakening. Secularists downplayed the moment as childhood parroting. He wasn't sure what bothered him more, being wrongly interpreted or having his son pulled into a conversation far bigger than he could comprehend. Sarah called again later that evening. "They've unearthed an old interview with your mom," she said, "where she mentioned church. It's adding fuel to the fire." Elon sighed. "I'm not even sure what I believe, Sarah. I've spent my life in the pursuit of knowledge, not belief. But this is different." "Because it wasn't about belief," Sarah said. "It was about curiosity, innocence, honesty." He nodded silently. That night, while X was brushing his teeth, he wandered into Elon's office in his pajamas, clutching his favorite blanket. He climbed onto the armchair beside his father and asked, "Dad, are people still talking about me?" "Yes, a lot," Elon replied, closing his laptop. "Did I say something wrong?" Elon shook his head. "Not at all. You said what you felt." "That's brave." X was quiet for a moment, then looked up. "Why do you think everyone got so serious?" Elon paused. Maybe because people want someone to say it's okay to ask the big questions." X tilted his head. "Like, who made the rules for science?" "Exactly." The boy nodded. "I think questions make people feel less alone." That simple sentence landed with unexpected weight. Elon looked at his son, realizing that in all his efforts to protect him from public scrutiny, he'd overlooked the deeper truth. X hadn't caused this moment. He had revealed it. The next morning, Elon stood at the window, holding a mug of coffee and watching the sunrise. He didn't know what to say to the world yet, but he was starting to understand why he needed to say something. Not a declaration, not a defense, just an honest reflection. Because silence, no matter how protective, could sometimes create more confusion than clarity. And maybe, just maybe, a voice like his asking honest questions could help others feel less alone too. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after the chaos of a media storm finally pauses for breath. Elon sat on the edge of his bed, still dressed from the day, scrolling through messages and articles he hadn't asked for but couldn't stop reading. The world was still buzzing about his son's comment, a simple sentence spoken in innocence, now echoing louder than any of his carefully prepared statements ever had. A soft knock on the door broke his focus. "Dad?" came the small voice. Elon looked up to see X, barefoot in his pajamas, clutching a stuffed rocket ship. His eyes were wide but calm, full of questions. "Can we talk more about God?" he asked. "I have more questions." Elon nodded, setting his phone aside. "Of course." They stepped out into the backyard together. The stars scattered above like diamonds on velvet. The air was cool, still, grounding. They lay side by side on a blanket, just like they had weeks earlier, when the whole conversation had started. X pointed upward. "That one is my favorite," he said, indicating a bright star near the horizon. "It always looks like it's smiling." Elon smiled too. "That's Venus. It reflects light from the sun." "Is that kind of like people reflect light from God?" X asked, without looking away. Elon's breath caught slightly. He didn't know where X got these ideas, but they hit harder than anything he'd read in the news. "I guess you could say that," he replied softly. They were quiet for a moment. Then X spoke again. "Remember when you told me that sometimes the biggest truths don't have simple answers?" Elon turned toward his son. "I remember. I think that's why people are confused about what I said," X continued. "Maybe they want the answer to be simple, but it's not." Elon reached over and ruffled his hair. "That's a very grown-up thought." X grinned. "You say I'm wise beyond my years, remember?" They laughed, but the moment stayed tender. Elon lay back again, eyes fixed on the stars, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel the wonder. Not analyze it, not dissect it, just feel it. When X had fallen asleep beside him, wrapped in his blanket, Elon carried him gently inside and tucked him into bed. But he didn't return to his own room. He sat in the dim light of his study instead, pulling out a leather notebook he rarely touched. He flipped past pages filled with sketches of rocket designs and equations and turned to a blank sheet. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he began to write. Not a press release, not a speech, but thoughts. Real thoughts. Question. Reflections. Memories of his own childhood in South Africa, sitting in a wooden pew beside his mother, hearing the choir, wondering what it all meant. Notes about X, his curiosity, his innocence, his wisdom wrapped in the simplicity of a child's voice. He didn't know where it would all lead, but for the first time in weeks, maybe months, he didn't feel the need to control it. He just needed to express it. As the night wore on, Elon continued to write. Not for headlines, not for clarity, but for connection, for truth, for something that couldn't be reduced to sound bites or dissected by pundits. Something that lived somewhere between science and wonder, between knowledge and faith. Something that had always been there. He just hadn't taken the time to listen. Until now. Elon sat at his desk the next morning, a fresh sense of resolve steadying his usually restless thoughts. The notebook he had filled the night before lay open beside him, its pages covered in scribbled reflections and half-formed phrases. For days, his team had asked him for a statement, something to ease the chaos, to calm the headlines, to reframe the narrative. But until now, nothing had felt right. Now, it wasn't about controlling the narrative. It was about honoring the moment. He opened a blank document on his laptop and began typing. Not for the media, not for his image, but for the parents out there, the children, the thinkers, the seekers, the ones asking questions just like X. He didn't write about belief systems, doctrines, or religion. Instead, he wrote about curiosity. I believe children should be free to ask big questions, the statement began. Whether those questions are about the stars above or the possibility of something greater than ourselves, they deserve the space to explore them. He paused, remembering the way X's voice had pierced through the morning show's polished surface. So pure, so unfiltered. In our home, he continued, conversations about science and wonder coexist. We look at the sky, not just to measure it, but to marvel at it. And sometimes, a 5-year-old says something that reminds you of how much beauty there is in not knowing everything. Elon was careful not to declare a belief. He didn't offer answers, only the importance of continuing to ask. I'm not a preacher, he wrote. I'm a seeker. My son reminded me of that. When the statement was finally published through his official channels, it didn't ignite another firestorm. It sparked something softer, something deeper. People shared it not to debate it, but to reflect on it. Parents posted about their own conversations with their children. Educators praised the encouragement of both science and spiritual curiosity. Thought leaders from across belief systems echoed the same response. Finally, something honest. Unlike before, Elon wasn't trending because of speculation. He was trending because people recognized sincerity. They saw the man behind the companies, the father behind the genius, the seeker behind the silence. The conversation had shifted, and this time it wasn't about controversy. It was about connection. The invitation came from the Cathedral of Hope in Dallas, a place known for embracing conversations that bridged science, social progress, and spiritual exploration. Elon Musk initially brushed it off. He wasn't interested in being part of a religious panel, let alone involving his young son again. But the more he thought about it, the more the idea shifted in his mind. It wasn't about theology. It was about curiosity, and this wasn't a circus. It was a respectful, moderated forum where all proceeds would benefit children's education programs. That mattered. He turned to X one evening and asked, "Would you want to go, just once, to talk about what you said and how it made people think?" X didn't hesitate. "Will there be questions?" "Yes." "Then yeah," the boy said. "Questions are good." And so they went. The sanctuary was full. Parents, students, thinkers, believers, skeptics. The atmosphere wasn't tense, it was hopeful. The stage was simple. 2 chairs, 2 microphones, and a warm welcome from the host, who reminded the crowd, tonight isn't about answers, it's about asking. Elon and X walked on stage to a standing ovation. X smiled shyly, holding tightly to his father's hand. Elon, wearing no suit or tie, just a plain dark shirt and jeans, looked out into the crowd with calm resolve. "I never thought I'd be here," he began, "especially not with my 5-year-old son as the catalyst for a global conversation." The audience laughed softly. When X made his comments on that morning show, I was caught off guard, but not because he said anything wrong. It was because he reminded me of something I'd forgotten: how important it is to wonder. He glanced at his son, who beamed back proudly. "We talk a lot about science in our house. Rockets, engines, physics. But we also talk about stars and where the rules that govern them might come from. And honestly, I think that's what's missing in a lot of our public conversations. Room for both." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "Science and faith don't need to be enemies," Elon continued. "They both begin with awe, with looking up and asking how and why. One gives us tools to explore the universe. The other reminds us that we belong to something bigger." He turned to his son. X didn't speak because someone told him what to say. He spoke because he was listening. To our talks, to the stars, to his own heart. And I think we all need to start listening more. Applause rippled gently across the room, not explosive but thoughtful, appreciative. "I'm not here to preach," Elon said, "but I will say this: the greatest gift we can give our children isn't just opportunity or education. It's the freedom to wonder, to question, to seek." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "Because sometimes the clearest truths come from the smallest voices." When the night ended, no one rushed to the exits. They lingered. People stood in groups, talking not just about Elon or X, but about meaning, belief, and possibility. It wasn't a PR stunt, it wasn't a spectacle. It was a moment. And Elon knew, deep down, that his son had started something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. That evening, Elon and X lay side by side in the quiet of their backyard, a blanket beneath them and the night sky above. The stars stretched endlessly across the heavens, glittering like questions waiting to be asked. X pointed upward with a tiny finger. "What do you see, Dad?" he whispered. Elon turned his head slightly, smiling at his son. "Connection," he replied. "Not equations, not orbits, not calculations, just connection. Between stars, between people, between generations." He turned his gaze from the sky toward the lens, as if addressing every viewer on the other side. "Ask questions," he said softly. "Encourage wonder, even from a 5-year-old. Especially from a 5-year-old. Because in a world filled with answers, it's the questions that lead us deeper." If this inspiring story stirred your heart, subscribe for more powerful journeys into faith, family, and meaning. There's always more to discover, sometimes through the smallest voice.